What up? What up? Never book review. So this is called The Undesirable Mini by Rosemary Ndubuizu. Okay, I hope I'm saying that right. But really awesome book. Highly recommend it. Definitely, we've been hearing a lot about capitalism and should Black people continue to believe in capitalism. This is another book that shows you why not. Right? We've already done it, and it has not worked for the majority of Black people. Right? So this book, it pretty much highlights the whole fight against housing discrimination in the nation's capital. So I've lived near DC for so long, and I was not aware of so much of this history, right? So I'm very thankful for this book. But this book talks about, like I said, housing discrimination in the nation's capital, against Black people, right? And especially against Black working class women, right? So, and the author does a good job of talking about the power of narratives and stories, right? And how one of the ways they discriminated against Black folk was through laws and policy, but they also used stories to reinforce that discrimination. So they had these narratives that made it seem like Black folk were lazy, that they were dirty, that they didn't know how to clean their homes. And this is even more egregious because, especially during the 1950s and even before that, primarily Black women were cleaning white people's homes. So they were trusted to clean white folks' home, but they were somehow they couldn't. It was somehow believed, or it was spread. This lie was spread that Black women or Black people couldn't clean their own homes, right? So they was trusted to clean white folks' home, couldn't clean their own homes. That was the narrative that was put out there, right? You have this long history of property managers in DC. So first white, but then interestingly, even some Black property owners engage in this too, where they would not keep upkeeping their properties, right? Their rental properties. So you had Black folk, Black working class people, especially Black working class women, forced to work in or forced to live in houses that had, or apartments that had mold, rats, roaches, electrical problems, all of these issues, and then they still expected them to pay rent. So she documents that long fight and how a lot of Black women were organizing at the forefront. They were organizing against this and saying, "Hey, we're not paying rent until these conditions are rectified." Right. So she documents that in the book. And like I said, she also documents the whole idea, or the reality, that you also had a Black political class that was in partnership with the white elites that also promoted a whole lot of these bad ideas, or myths about Black working class women in particular, and saying that, they needed to, as the author say, they engaged in what's known as what the author talks about is housing, disciplinary housing governance, right? So this whole idea that working class people needed to be surveilled, they needed to be disciplined because they were irresponsible. They were irresponsible tenants and all of this stuff. So that's why they needed to be surveilled and all of this stuff, right? So a lot of these narratives were used to, like I said, pretty much blame Black people for a lot of the issues in public housing. Like I said, the rats, roaches, it was literally falling apart. So instead of just paying money to rectify those problems, they blame Black people and essentially pushed them out. So we have urban renewal or Negro removal, right, and pushing them out of their community. So, and this is a long process. The 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. So a lot of these narratives are pushed and they're remixed over and over. Some beginning pushed by white folk, and then eventually being pushed by Black elites and even some Black people in the working class as well, right? So she kind of documents a lot of this in the book, right? And I think it's very impactful for us today to look at this because we see some of these narratives still being used against Black working class people today. But one of the things I love about this book as well is that even though they talk about a lot of the issues and a lot of the ways that Black folk have been treated unfair, she's very also clear that Black communities didn't just take this line down, right? So you have a robust organizing, education that's going on in the Black community to push back against housing discrimination. So I definitely want to shout out people that I didn't know in the book, but that they talked about in the book: Loretta Ross, Yolanda Ward, of the Citywide Housing Coalition in DC. They did a lot of awesome work trying to push back against this gentrification that was happening in the 70s and the 80s, right? And they had organizing. They had political education they were doing, and they were really highlighting the role that capitalism played in gentrification, the role that capitalism played in that capitalism, patriarchy, racism, how all of that was impacting how Black folk and working class Black folk were being treated in the housing market, right? So it wasn't just all this neutral stuff. It was no, they all being discriminated against and being pushed out. But they organized and didn't just take it lying down, right? So these are the examples that we need to be following today, right? Especially a lot of the Black working class organizers. We need to be definitely practicing their legacy today, right? So get this book, awesome book, The Undesirable Many. We all should be desirable, right? In terms of housing, that should be a human right. This book shows you one of the reasons why. But yeah, we should all be desirable. Go get this book. Awesome, awesome history. And like I said, roadmap for what we should be doing today.